Okay, so today we're talking about from audiation to the page. The basic idea here is how do you take an idea internally and extract it so that you can edit it and work on it on the actual page. The idea here is we're going to work with melody today, and I want to show you how a melody can start to sort of evolve from that single seed. The first thing we want to start with, this is sort of my process. Your process might be a little different. I'm actually very interested in knowing what your process actually is because everybody has a slightly different approach to creation. For me, I discovered really in high school and college, if I could get to that state, they call it hypnopompic and hypnagogic states. It's a state where you're either going into sleep or you're coming out of it. I discovered that in that state, you could actually be very creative and you could hear things very clearly. And so it was always my goal to try and stay awake, because when you're in these states, you're very close to going to sleep and it's easy to just fall into sleep. And so over time, I discovered ways to kind of stay awake and actually to be aware because you have to be aware in order to write your ideas down. If you're in this state, one of the problems is your eyes are closed and you can't do anything physically. So the solution to that is to increase your musical memory. The first thing you want to do, and you can kind of do this with me, is just try and close your eyes and get into a state where things are very quiet and very peaceful. This is where I believe that music truly begins. I mean, especially in a world where we're dealing with AI now creating music, you want to be original. Well, AI is not original. And I don't know if it will be in the future, but right now it is not very original. It is just taking everything that already exists and compiling it in a way that basically reproduces what is already there. So, as a human, you actually have the ability to have true creativity. So, we want to start by just closing our eyes and trying to form a simple melody. Now, we're going to start with melody today, but composition doesn't always start with melody. Sometimes it starts with a rhythm. Sometimes it starts with a harmony or a chord progression. Sometimes it starts with just a general vague sense of an idea. But today we're going to start with melody because it's honestly one of the easier things to teach and it has more information than just a pure rhythm. I believe that anybody can do this. And even if you don't want to be a composer, I think you should attempt to audiate because when you can audiate, you can preview things. This is something that I want to talk about briefly. As a performer, if you are trying to improvise and you have a general sense of the layout of the piece and you can visualize that piece in your mind in real time, it doesn't need to be perfect, but you can get it close enough, then you can close your eyes and you can improvise along with the music. This is why I think that audiation is so important for improvisers because it is true that you get really good at something by doing it. And if you don't have an ensemble to play the music or a recording to play the music and you can improvise on top of it, you lack the opportunity to improvise, to practice. And one of the things with audiation that's better than a recording is you can pause it. You can have kind of the orchestra or your ensemble play the first couple chords, and then you can pause it and you can play around with a few ideas, and then you have them play those chords again, and then you try and improvise those ideas again, and you can go measure by measure. I believe that everybody should try to develop audiation because these are valuable skills that are going to help you long term, no matter if you're a performer or a composer. This is kind of our first step. We need to sort of find the seed. We need to get clarity in audiation. So, like I was saying with the improvisation, if you are improvising, then if you are trying to preview an entire ensemble, chances are you're not hearing it in great detail. You're hearing kind of a general essence of what the piece is. You generally know maybe there's some trumpets, there's a guitar, maybe there's a drum set, but you probably can't hear each individual line clearly. So, one of the things we want to do is gradually build up our ability to take parts apart in our mind. And the first step is clearly hearing one single melody. So, we're going to do a little practice today. So, I want you to close your eyes, just kind of let everything fall away. What I want you to do is just listen to this note. It's just a single note. This is a C4, by the way, for those of you that are curious. Okay, your eyes are closed. You're just hearing this. Don't let it do anything other than what you're hearing. Just listen to this note and play it back in your mind in the silence. Can you hear the piano sound? Okay. Now, the next step is I want you to let it move. There's going to be a lot of silence in this because we're walking you through an actual practice. So listen to this tone. And where does it want to go? This is a technique that a lot of really great composers use. I mean, I was talking to Virko Bali. He's a Ukrainian composer, and I asked him once in an interview, how do you determine the next note? And he says, the music sort of leads me. The next note becomes obvious. So what I'd like you to try and do is just listen to this note, and it's going to be different for everybody, but figure out where it wants to go. Just kind of let it unfold in your mind. Maybe you hear it go up by step. And just play those first two notes over and over again. Don't let it go past those first two notes. Stop it right there. That's very important. Just repeat those two notes over and over again. You can use my notes or you can create something else, but what matters is that it resonates with you and you're like, that note right there, it has to go up, it has to go down, it has to skip, it has to leap, whatever you want to do. So we want to ask where it wants to go. We're having a conversation really with this melody in our mind. And what this is doing is it's allowing us to really connect with the idea. A lot of us can probably sit there and we can just kind of imagine a melody. Often I hear people tell me that when they're driving in a car or they're walking, that's when the melodies come to them. We know that Beethoven used to go on long walks to kind of work through compositions in his mind. I personally know that if I'm driving, that's when the most melodies come to me. And I've experienced this working with many of my audiation students where they say, yeah, it's in the car, that's when all the idea comes, and I can't sit down and write it out because I'm in the car. And as soon as I stop driving, it's gone. So what we're trying to do here is in a seated position with our eyes closed, we're trying to control it. We're trying to turn the seed into something greater, but we're controlling it. We're not letting it go out on its own just yet. So once you have those two notes, the next question you want to ask yourself is, are those two notes clear in your mind and are they memorable? Can you audiate just the first two notes 3 times completely unchanged? So go ahead and try that. Take your first two notes, very simple right now. We're going slowly. We want to make this easy. So audiate those two notes 3 times. Don't change it. We don't want to write the idea down yet. In fact, if you're going through this process for real, you wouldn't write it down at all today. What we want to do is let this idea breathe and settle. So now we're going to take a moment and we're going to allow it to go past the two notes. We're going to try and create a motive or maybe half a phrase. If you want to create an entire melody, you can, but that's going to be harder for you to remember. So maybe you just sit here and you think, and you come up with something short like that. It's not a complete melody, but it's a phrase. What we're trying to do is just create a very short melody, something that you can easily remember. Just something like that. And go ahead and repeat it 3 times. When you can repeat it 3 times, then you can settle on that melody and we're good to go. I'm going to give you just a few moments to try this. Try and hear everything you can. What's the dynamic level? Are there articulations? Is it legato? Is it rubato? You know, what about it? Try and get as many details as you can. Now, this is an important one. Probably isn't going to happen with a short melody, but if it kind of slips away, just wait to return. So if you're playing this melody and you don't really remember where it was supposed to go after that, just take a moment and play those first two notes, the first three notes, whatever you have, and see if it returns to you. We're kind of working on this process where we want to choose something that doesn't go away, something that's easy for you to remember. Because if it's overly complex for you to remember, how is the audience going to remember it? You have to keep this in mind. You are writing for an audience. Now, if you're writing highly abstract music, if you're writing academic music, that's a little bit different because you're trying to push the boundaries of what we consider music. You may be even working with generators or found sounds or doing something highly complex with whatever you can find in your environment. That's a different type of music. We're talking mostly about tonal music, music that at least the tonal center may shift quickly, but we can remember the melody from it. We're not talking a John Cage silent piano piece or anything like that. So what you'll do, let's say you forget it, but you remember the first two notes. This is what you're doing in your mind. I'm playing it on piano, but you're hearing it in your mind. You just go back and forth and you wait for a moment and you say, what was the next note? Where was it supposed to go? And maybe it comes back down. And then you remember, oh, yeah, that's right. It comes back down. So what was the next note after that? And you keep going and you try and remember it. And what might happen is the melody might change, but that's part of the process. If the melody changes, in my opinion, that's an indication that maybe that melody that you had wasn't the one you need to be working on. So we're taking a very intuitive approach at first. And composition is pretty intuitive. We want to take our time, we want to just let things unfold, and we want to really get into what we are creating. So that's kind of the first step. And the way I see it, if you can't audiate or remember it, it's not ready for production. It's not ready for you to edit because this needs to be something that kind of fits your core. It gets deep inside your mind so that you can edit it, so that you can manipulate it, so that you can develop it into a full composition. So many people have trouble with what we call the first eight measures. We've heard this before. Genius starts at the eighth measure or the ninth measure. The idea here is that after that first phrase, what do you do? Well, if you take this approach and you become intimately familiar with the material you're working on, then all of a sudden it flows much more naturally. It's more clear where it needs to go. You're not wasting time writing things down or putting things into a notation program. You're letting your mind do the work in the background. So we have to put in this initial effort on the melody or the rhythm, the harmony, so that the rest of the piece unfolds much more smoothly. I view it kind of as a little flame. It's like it can go out so quickly, these initial melodies. Maybe not today, but if you come back to this tomorrow and you try and recall this memory and you did this melody and you did not write it down, chances are you're going to forget parts of it. You're probably going to remember where you started. You're going to know, hey, I started on C4, and you can go back to the piano or in your mind actually, and you just hear it. Every time I play on the piano, imagine that as you hearing it. And you do the process again. You say, can I remember where that went? I know it went up. Or maybe you play around. No, that wasn't it. No. Oh, there, that feels right. That was the melody I was working with yesterday. And you piece it back together. The reason we want to do this is because we want to get it clearly in our mind. We want to learn to preserve the idea so that when we go to write it down later, we have the memory to do it. And we also want to kind of get it into our consciousness. We want to firmly understand it because, as many of you have probably experienced, the idea can vanish when you start writing. The moment you sit down, you're moving from a state of creativity, intuitiveness, kind of like the creative side of your brain, to the more analytical side of your brain. They're different skills. There's the creative side that allows you to come up with something, and then there's the editing side that takes over the moment you try and start notating. So as soon as you start putting those notes on the page, you get halfway through the melody, you can lose it. And so that's another reason why we're trying to develop our memory in this very casual, fun way. Now, this is an exercise. This is something you can just spend a couple minutes each day doing, and it will gradually increase your ability to audiate and your ability to work with melodies in your mind. And then eventually, you add harmony and you add some rhythm, you add some other instruments. But if you just do this a little bit every day, it gets easier. And the ideas don't vanish when you start writing. It goes back to what I said at the beginning, those states where you're going in and out of sleep. They're both very creative states, but you can't do anything in the real world in those states. So you have to be able to go there and then remember it when you come out. And that's what we're trying to do partially. As you're notating, these are all little techniques you can use. You sit down and you write that C out. When you write that C out, make sure you've gone to your instrument and you've played the first note so that you make sure you have the first note. Hear it. I'm writing the C on the paper and I'm hearing it sound. Just don't rush. Go from that C to the D flat, back to the C. As you are writing these notes on the paper, make sure you hear them. There's a good chance that you're going to naturally hear something, but you want to make sure you're hearing what you're writing. Not, for example, you might generally hear the lines going up and coming back down. We want to try and make sure you're hearing the exact notes you're writing. And you should only go to the notation when that phrase is really anchored inside. Now, this is not the fastest way to compose in the beginning because you first have to memorize the piece. You first have to work it out. And in the beginning, you start with maybe one melody at a time. You work out that melody. You memorize as much as you can hold, and then you put it on paper. And then what you can do is you can go back and the paper can serve as a reminder. But over time, by practicing it this way, you develop an increasing ability to memorize what you're working on. So you don't write anything down that hasn't been fully anchored inside. That's the idea here. And this is an important point. The page should reflect your inner hearing. It should reflect what you're hearing. It shouldn't dictate it. So many students, I can tell when they're using a notation program. There's something about the notation program that locks students into decisions that they probably wouldn't make had they been intentional about all the notes they're putting on the page. They tend to be very repetitive. They tend to have some chord progressions that don't make sense. What is the role of music theory in composition? So many composers come to me like, well, it fits the theory. And my response, especially now, is, well, AI can do that. AI can fit a theory. What you want to do is learn theory as a way to kind of formulate your logical process for the music that came before you, but then you want to create something new. And the best way to do that is by sitting with these ideas, letting them develop naturally, listening to the voice leading, seeing how things kind of unfold naturally. Because if you can play something back in your mind and you like it, that is good enough for you, right? It doesn't have to be something that everybody loves. We're not here to please everybody. We're here to write the music that is inside of you. And that is going to be original if you can unlock it, if you can bring it out. That's what I mean by the page should reflect your inner hearing and not dictate it. Because so often when we start writing music, we see, oh, there's only 2 notes here, but I had a harmony with 3 notes right before it. I need to throw in another note just to throw in another note. If that's not what you're hearing, we don't want to include it just for the sake of making the music look pretty. You know, we call that paper music. It's something that happens a lot in academic music where it looks really pretty on the page. It's almost like a work of art, but when it's played, it's really hard to understand. That's what we would call the coherence of the piece is really high because there's patterns, there's logic, but there's no comprehensibility. Nobody can hear the patterns. They're too complex. So that's something we want to focus on. Once we kind of have our simple melody, we want to start expanding it. We want to grow the phrase. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some techniques to develop your simple idea into a fuller, more complete phrase. Phrases, especially tonal phrases, they often grow from repetition and variation. I'm talking about the most common way to develop a phrase. There's a fine line between too much repetition and too little. You have to have a certain amount of repetition so that people can latch on to something. Otherwise, it just feels like the piece is constantly moving forward and it feels like it's meandering. So we want to have a little bit of repetition. So we listen to our initial idea. Let me say, what about that is characteristic? Stepwise motion is usually not characteristic, although John Williams did a great job with making Jaws very characteristic, that Jaws thing. It's the leap that stands out. Everything else is kind of generic. So the thing that draws your attention in, I mean, if I were to just play stepwise motion, it doesn't stand out as much. When I remove the stepwise motion and I have that leap, we want to hang on that F for just a little bit. Top note here is an F. And we want to kind of focus on it and we want to draw our attention to it. It brings our attention in. So we want to look for the parts of our melody, whatever we've created, that stand out. What makes it unique? It's a very common term. If you ever study William Kaplan's classical form text, he'll talk about this. He'll talk about characteristic versus uncharacteristic music, right? And ideas. Characteristic is going to be something that is unique. It's unique to the piece. And then it's not uncharacteristic. He calls it conventional, I believe. Conventional is like a cadence. You can use it in almost any piece. It doesn't have anything about it that really is unique. It can be substituted for many different pieces. So right here, it's that F. So we look for the things that can be repeated and that will stand out. So if I go something like this, I'm just going to make something up. This is a very simple repetition, but it allows it to get into listener's mind. And then if I want to take it a step further, we can just start playing around with it as long as you have that C F relationship or D flat F. As long as you have something characteristic in there, we can use that to keep varying the line and making it grow. So that's something we want to look for. So what we do is we try and audiate our line again, and you start simple. Start by just altering one detail, like the rhythm, the pitch, or the dynamics. Try playing it as piano. Try playing it really loud. it takes on a different characteristic. So this is a form of variation. We can simply change the dynamics. We can change some articulations. There's lots of ways that we can start to grow the phrase. And we want to do that in order to keep the interest high. So you can try a sequence like what I just did a few moments ago. You can move the idea higher, lower, just let it travel. Don't do it on the piano though, because I'm a victim of this. I'm not a pianist. I don't really play piano that well. But when I play it on the piano, my fingers are naturally holding the shape of the line, and they are naturally going to particular keys that they have learned, patterns that they have practiced. Your brain doesn't do that. When you audiate something, it's much smoother, it's much easier to work with. And you don't have to worry about, well, where is that note on the piano? You don't have to worry about the ear training aspect of it. You can just play through the idea. And so you sit here, take your idea that you were working with in the previous step, just that simple, maybe it was a 4-note idea, take it and just play with it for a while. This is what you're doing in your head. You just repeat it over and over again. And then when it feels like it should do something else, when you feel like you know the next step, let it unfold like I just did. I allowed it to move out of its initial starting point. I'm letting it grow. This is one of the things you want to do. And then maybe you play that a few times and then maybe you do the entire phrase. This is literally growing a musical idea from a seed. The seed was the C. And then it grew a little bit, went up to the D flat, came back to the C, up to F, E flat, D flat, C. It's growing. And so we want to take this initial seed and we want to keep expanding it greater and greater. Okay. So you can try this. And the idea here is that you can be walking. You don't actually have to have your eyes closed if you can hear it. You can be walking. I don't think you should play it on your instrument, because anything you play on your instrument is going to be idiomatic to whatever instrument you play. We want to get away from that. Even with improvisation, you might be thinking, well, my goal is to be an improviser. Even with improvisation, the brain comes first. You need to have the technique on your instrument to do this, of course. But more than that, you don't want your instrument to dictate. Just like when I was talking about notation. You don't want what you write down, the notation program, whatever you're using, to dictate what you write. You want your brain to be dictating what you write. So you sit down, you kind of let these ideas unfold, and then once you feel like you have something concrete, that's when you apply it. And so if you combine this with ear training, what happens is they eventually mix up, because right now your ear training is not working because it's not practical. You are doing it in a very isolated environment, a controlled environment, where you are separating things into like minor thirds, perfect fourths, you're identifying intervals and chords. It doesn't become practical until you mix it with the audiation, until you sit there and you start coming up with these ideas. You come up with the idea first, and then you go back, preferably without going to your instrument and figuring out what the exact notes are. So we don't have perfect pitch. Most of us don't. If that's the case, it's a little bit harder because you just have to find the first note. But once you find the first note, once I know it's a C, I can write that entire melody out without ever having to go and do anything on my instrument. You should be able to. And so that's when the training you've been doing, the technique, the technology of ear training suddenly becomes useful, because now you're going through and you're applying it in a practical way. And the more you do this, you just practice every day, the faster you get at it. And then eventually it becomes something you can use in improvisation. But it takes time. The alternative is you start to memorize different patterns and idiomatic expressions and licks on your instrument, and you're always just improvising what you already know. And occasionally, in a moment of inspiration, you kind of enter that state of flow, you're able to create something new, but those moments are fewer and far between. So, in order to get better, develop the mind first, and then apply it to what you know from the ear training you've been practicing. So, from there, we want to continue to develop our ideas. We want to add a little bit of contrast. So, after your first melody, you hear it. Now I feel like I've come to a close. So now we need a new idea. So you sit there and you say, okay, I need to audiate a response to this. So this one was going up. Okay, so maybe the response goes the other direction. And what happens is, if you've worked with that initial idea, first day you work on it, second day you come back, if you still have it memorized and you can remember it from memory, you go on to the next phase where you start to expand it. What happens is it starts to go much more quickly. So the second day, all of a sudden, it's kind of unleashed because you gave your brain a moment to say, hey, we worked on this for a long time yesterday. I don't know why this matters, but apparently it's important to my survival because we spent a lot of time on this. I could have been drinking water or finding food, but no, we spent time working on this melody. And then you come back the next day, like we're still working on it. And then usually by the third or fourth day, it tends to escalate. The better you get at this, it tends to happen more quickly. And as you practice this, it starts to unfold very fast. And this is what we're looking for. I'm talking about improvisation because a lot of you are improvisers. A lot of you come to me and say, I need to improvise. At this point, we just start trying to add contrast. We play around with different ideas. We always stay connected to the original line. We never leave it alone. We always have to keep coming back to it because that's what gives the piece kind of its structure. That's what gives the piece its home base. And so you just work with these ideas and they start to naturally grow on their own. This is really a practice. It's a discipline. I mean, you want to be a musician or you're doing this for a hobby. It's one of those things where music is great because every day we come back to it, there's something more to learn. There's something more to improve. And it does take daily practice. It doesn't take a ton of daily practice. You don't need to be studying 10 hours a day with audiation. That's kind of a nice thing. Even 5 to 10 minutes will get you some results. I think kind of the perfect amount of audiation time, if you're going through a structured program, I think 40 minutes to an hour is a good amount of time. Any more than that's overkill. But it's going to really depend on what you have time for. And every time you move from audiation to the page, you take an idea and you put it on the page and it matches what you hear, you grow, you get better.